I'm Irving, Black Road Data Refinement.
Oh, I'm sorry, sir. I didn't think anybody was out here.
I was just going in. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, sir. I didn't think anybody was out here.
I was just going in.
Welcome back, everybody. Today we are discussing Severance Season 1, Episode 2, titled Half Loop. Now, if I sound a little bit different, I am battling a cold or allergies. I live in Texas. It is impossible to know. But Episode 1 ended with the reveal that Miss Cobell was Mark's nosy neighbor, Petey successfully got a secret note over to Mark, and Helly was finally understanding that she was never going to leave this place. Half Loop opens to the interview that assured her twisted fate.
I am aware that this alteration is comprehensive and irreversible.
That's a wrap.
Mr. Milchick talks to Helly about the specifics of her new life and Mr. Egan being a big fan of eggs for breakfast. It continues the line of questioning that was a little bit odd that we saw in Episode 1.
What is Mr. Egan's favorite breakfast?
That one makes no sense.
Right.
And this moment could be viewed as a way to just assure that Helly knew this fun fact, right? More than just the polite workplace banter. Imagine using this obscure note as a benchmark to verify that the operation worked, and they just happen to have the one person who never went to Egan trivia night. Without any spoilers, because like I said in the first video, we know what happens. This part has some additional weight when you consider the role that Helly plays outside of her severed counterpart.
Am I dead?
No.
We then see the brain surgery that makes Severance possible and Mr. Milchick staring into our eyes. Lots of ketamine, which as a good Christian boy, I can only say, nay, horse drug, but it does beg the question about the mechanics of how the severance process works. We see this implant, and a quick freeze frame will reveal this string on the screen. I tried searching for additional meaning, but wasn't all that successful. Severance, medical practice, maybe some kind of batch number or lot number. It could be a unique serial so that they can keep track of which chip correlates to which person, which I think would be kind of standard at a company like this size, this much power. I love the idea that this could be used against Lumen later on as well. Imagine a plot where our heroes tamper with the database, so whenever they try to remotely interface, the big bad accidentally shuts down the implant for the CEO of the company or something, right? Assuming they would be dumb enough to get the implant, but that's besides the point. Is this actually the amount of ketamine that doctors would need for any procedure? Or do they just open up your head and pour it in like solar opposites?
Whose ass was I gonna kick again?
Just keep doing that until she's cool.
We also see the screen sharing some fun brain stuff, and I'll leave it here for you to examine, but the thing that grabs my attention is this here. It feels like it could be telling us the implant was not placed exactly where it needed to be. The selected tool is too short for trajectory, and we see the tooltip right before injection as well. Like, I don't know, let me know what y'all think about this.
Sorry if I freak out on you a little.
Don't worry. I'm very excited to meet you.
Regardless, the mood is set. She is doing this irreversible thing for a greater good that somehow relates to the authoritative idol she passed moments ago. Helly sits perfectly still while we consider what kind of person would want this. And the implant goes in, it expands, her eyes, like her face just quickly relaxes, right? And Mr. Milchick, of course, just keeps staring into our eyes.
Your orientation's been so much fun.
This brings us to the other side of the stairway tango that we saw last episode. It was cool to see this side of it and learn how they condition new people that don't know the pain, the trauma, or fear that their other halves are currently experiencing.
You're an inquisitive one.
I don't want to be in there, do I?
You're learning that you do.
Eventually it shifts to Audi Helly arriving back upstairs through the assigned elevator, indicating that they successfully got inside Helly to go along with the flow, at least for now.
Hey, old timer. One day down.
This is when we get Severance's incredible intro for the first time. Like, what is there to say? It's strange, it's weird, it's artistically appealing. I want to taste whatever black licorice goo this is, and I don't even like black licorice. This intro is a 10 out of 10 for me, and it could probably have its own video. Mark is the first in the office now that Petey is gone. He turns the lights on, listens to some white noise hum of fleeting fluorescence, and goes over the senior refiner morning checklist. I paused it for your viewing pleasure. To me, it's a lot of stuff that should be covered by janitorial staff, though the nature of the floor may impact that existing at all. The note about reviewing employee lunches kind of sticks out to me as a way that they could possibly sneak things in or out, though this really doesn't become a notable point, I don't believe. Acknowledging Keir Egan portrait verbally, silently, just has such an odd feel to it. In the first episode breakdown, I discussed the resemblance to the late North Korean leaders who hang on the prominent wall of every North Korean home. This affirms that desire for the showrunners to create an intrusive, authoritative power for us to resist, for us to acknowledge, if nothing else. Something that hangs over our protagonist's head and demands attention even in his moments alone. We then see a barrage of different office things that have the company name on it. When I first started writing about this episode, I brought up the fact that we don't know what Lumen does, and this was a way to show that they have their hand in everything. And that may still be true, but then I realized I was drinking out of a coffee mug with my company's logo on it and realized the oversight that I was making. We don't know that they are ultimately making all of these products, but they could be, right? Mark breaks protocol here and puts the picture with Petey in the supply closet, giving us the perfect shot to highlight what I was describing last episode review. Desks here are just pixels away from being a swastika. Helly enters and they talk about focusing on the effects of sleep and how jarring it is to leave work on a Friday and pop back into existence Monday morning. That alone would make me want to end it all. Full stop. Like, if this is actually my perceived existence, I am out.
Yeah, they stagger the entries too, so we don't meet on the outside. It's important, apparently.
Which just begs the question, why? Will outside anything affect relationships inside? Like, the body keeps score, but it shouldn't, based on how they describe the procedure to us. So why would it matter if Mark and Helly were childhood friends or neighbors or lovers or anything? It just begs the question about why Miss Cobell is Mark's neighbor at all if this is an issue, right?
Should I be taking notes?
No.
Dylan walks Helly through the employee benefits for doing a good job, meaning that Lumen realized at some point you must incentivize employees with something. I've sat in this point for a good minute and I want to highlight the term wage slavery. It seems like the showrunners could be trying to highlight how little difference there is between slavery and working for a wage in modern times. Actually dating back to Cicero, who wrote about jobs like a pretentious father trying to make sure Troy didn't go to AC repair school. Unbecoming to a gentleman too, and vulgar are the means of livelihood of all hired workmen whom we pay for mere manual labor, not for artistic skill. For in their case, the very wage they receive is a pledge of their slavery. The innies do this unbecoming manual labor and witness zero effect of the wage that may or may not afford them freedom to do as they please. They trade 5 days for 2 and are incentivized to work in a system that vaguely hides from its true nature with finger traps and vague threats of how bad things could get if you do not do what you're told. So, how do you stop people from viewing themselves as slaves in a system like this, right? Viewing themselves as something that they need to escape from, to get out of, to rebel against.
You'll note I've accrued an embarrassment of wealth in that regard.
Wow.
Correct.
They quickly talk about the waffle party that does become important later on in the series and Mark's head cube.
What about Mark's crystal head cube?
That's not a prize, that's just something they gave him.
And I'm very curious as to why. It feels like something that could have additional weight later in the series or something of a red herring. It could have come from Petey, it could have come from Miss Cobell. It's not exactly clear right now.
Helly, could you flip on this console?
They boot up Helly's computer for the very first time, and assuming this is where Petey sat, it likely means they had to issue either a whole new computer or wiped his old one completely for security purposes. We see the bootstrap process start and get a nice screen to study if you so wish. Nothing really to note, just showing that they operate on their own operating system. This could highlight that they are tech savvy in nature, but also that it's possible to pay someone to alter, an operating system image, such as Linux, to say, Lumen OS instead of Mint OS, for instance. Port type 3 stood out to me and led me down a little bit of a rabbit hole. Now, this is the official list of registered ports via the Internet Assigned Number Authority. Port 2 and 3 both list as compressed nets, and all of this is really not needed. You can fast forward if you want. But I have never heard of this port, of this protocol in my entire IT man cybersecurity life. So I did a little bit of digging and I found nothing. The only thing that I could find was this note on a third-party website citing a man named Bernie Voles. Now, everything else related to malware or a new tech with the same name compressing images over a network. I reached out to Bernie for more information about this old technology, like ports 2 and 3, like we're talking about 90s. We're talking about something that happened maybe even before the 90s. But ultimately, I reached out for more information, as it seems like he was the only person on the first 13 pages of Google or the Library of Congress to know anything at all about this. And I have not received word back as of this recording, unless I stop this right now and edit it. So assuming I just continued talking right now, yeah, he didn't reply back, and I have no idea what compressed net is, which is just kind of a little weird thing. Also, shout out to Bernie Voles anyway. Dude has worked on tech paper since 1999, has been engaging in discussions on how technology should operate probably before then too. It just seems like a god tier nerd that has been doing the work since I was a wee tot, and I want someone to recognize how cool that is too. This is a strange rabbit hole, I know, but why does this matter? Well, a weird, mysterious, compression-based technology that was developed years ago that operates over port 3 seems pretty Severance to me. So if macro data refinement relates to compressing files over wide area networks like the internet, or an intranet for a company, this could be the first breadcrumb in the most wild breadcrumb trail ever, right? So ultimately, I just want to say it's kind of weird that port 3 relates to this archaic thing that I can find nothing about. But maybe I just was mistaken. Let me know if anybody knows anything, thank you, Morty, about compressed net. Excuse me. He begins teaching Helly while Irving voices his opinion about Mark breaking protocol with the picture. Mark explains that everything falls into one of 4 categories and will be placed evenly between all 5 buckets. All the data comes from upstairs, fully encoded, and then it's really just a subjective feeling about the numbers and how they present that will tell the operators where to put them. It is a when you get it type of thing. It's literally nonsense to how you train anybody to do anything. Except for, I guess, truly most things. Like, there's telling someone how to do something, and then there's like that moment that they are comprehending it. So in that sense, it feels like that. There's just no other instruction other than, when you get it, you get it. I've been waiting for this moment since I first watched the show to truly dive into my thoughts about what they are doing here. And to me, this just screams encryption. I come from an IT background, so that was probably why my mind stuck to this and has yet to leave it. In theory, you could create a cryptographic encryption protocol in a billion different ways, maybe an infinite different number of ways, but most of them would be a computer generating numbers using a predefined man-made logic system. There is a real-life company called Cloudflare, which in part uses this set of lava lamps to secure a large part of the internet so that you can't just capture all of the traffic and know what everybody is doing, unless you're the government. And so it does this, again, in part by telling the software to create the encryption keys by looking at these lamps and generating numbers based on the pixels and where they are and how they present and the lighting and a few different things. Also a few different things that they don't include at all. But ultimately, it turns it into a unique string of numbers that are damn near impossible to reverse engineer or guess. Not impossible, but damn near. If you subscribe to the theory of determinism, nothing could be random, and as such, a computer cannot truly generate a random thing. Even if you don't subscribe to determinism or you're new to the channel, a computer cannot just generate a random thing. However, if you are here from my Westworld days, you'll know that while true randomness may not exist in an objective sense, subjectively, we experience randomness all the time. Whoa, like that, right? Like It was pretty random. Why did I do it? No clue, but past me wrote it, told me to do it right now, so present me recorded it, and future me will have to edit it out or leave it in. And sincerely, it's not a random thing, but my subjective experience was random to me. The things that I said, the way that I said it, the cadence, everything, like so much went into the reasons that I made the decision to do that exact thing in that exact moment, in that exact way, that while it could theoretically all be tracked and originated or sourced as a causal, effectal system, to me, it was completely random. So, making an encryption protocol based on subjectivity is a genius way to create a secure communication channel.
Each category of numbers presents in such an order as to elicit an emotional response in the refiner. Feel a certain way on sight. They'll be sort of disconcerting, scary.
Imagine one severed worker in Maine and another one in Maryland. Each would identify the numbers in the exact same way because they are essentially doing the exact same thing, right? Once they get it, and both understand why 4 is so scary sometimes. If Lumen needed to send a message across the world, they could do so with certainty that the only people that could generate the same key to read it would be another site with another Mark, for instance, who creates the exact same key based on his subjective feeling of how those numbers present. The only way to make it more secure is to have 4 of them. Now, I won't pat myself on the back too hard. There is some holes in this theory. The obvious point to consider is that we don't know that there are more than one site, right? More than one team that does this. But we're playing with memories, and Lumen has an almost godlike power right now. If Mark has like 30 copies of himself, or if there are just 30 copies of Mark in the world, like that wouldn't be shocking to me. It doesn't even have to be another Mark or another person that we already know. It just needs to be another severed employee that has been conditioned to feel like 4 is scary sometimes. As the series goes on, I'll be watching for ways to disprove this theory, but right now, as Helly is vaguely learning what they do, this is, after months of consideration, my best guess at what macro data refinement really means.
Sounds dumb, and Mark said it dumb.
After Helly has been properly trained and told to stare at numbers until it clicks, Irving makes himself known as the stickler for the rules. Helly then asks what happens if she wants to quit. Mark highlights that it's unlikely and that even if it does happen, it means that she will basically die. The version of her will be removed from existence, which was one of the early parts of the show on like my first watch that really hooked me. This framing is wild, and I didn't really consider that until this was explicitly stated.
Helly, welcome. I'm agog at how well I can tell you're already fitting in.
Mr. Milchek comes to party and they play a little ball. Irving brings up the core principles and then forces Helly, a person with a lifespan of a toddler, to speak about herself. The picture of this ruler hangs over their heads as they explain the code detectors and try to give examples about what she could say in this awkward moment.
I don't think you're quite getting the game here, Helly.
Mr. Milchek speaks for Helly, and then we see Mark try to skirt out of the game with a happy smile. It breaks, and he actually gets quite revealing, basically telling on himself for taking the picture of Petey and hiding it in the storage closet. It turns into Mark becoming quite emotional, wondering if his suddenly fired friend was out there living his best life or dead in a ditch somewhere. It was a crack in the porcelain world, and Helly notices right away.
I think this is a good time to remind ourselves that things like deaths happen outside of here, not here. A life at Lumen is protected from such things.
Which, oh my God, the verbiage is wild. Of course, deaths can happen here. Like, they're human, right? But like I talked about in the season 2 trailer breakdown and episode 1 breakdown, death and Lumen have a weird relationship. At least they are building a weird relationship with it, and telling sad people that they need to remember that death doesn't happen here instead of being sad that it could have happened elsewhere is a weird point to make at all. On my first watch, this really didn't grab my attention. It was just a manager saying, find comfort to know that you are safe while you're here. But something is just leaning away from the surface level here.
And I think a great potential response to that from all of you is gratitude.
The mood then drastically shifts as the melon bar comes into the picture. Funky music plays while Irving examines some black residue under his fingernails. Then Mark gives Helly a little bit of a warning.
Yeah, Milchek's a nice man. When he says something, it's best to listen.
I don't care.
Because he can't always be nice like that.
Okay, refiners.
It pairs this uncanny feeling of bright smiles hiding sad minds with red tape flags announcing why. It's wonderful. We consider what would really happen if they don't behave, and I think Helly does the same while they pose for a picture that will sit on their desk for the next who knows how many years.
Remember, you're gonna be looking at this every day.
This eventually freaks Helly out and she tries to quit. Despite the sincere warnings from her coworkers, she leaves, and right before the elevator takes off, the doors refuse to close and the lights flash red as we meet Mr. Grainer. I loved this shot of him passing by. Something about this was very shark-like, and I just loved it. The conversation becomes tense, and before they can go anywhere, Mark saves the day. He takes the blame for Helly trying to escape, and it feels like this moment builds some trust with Helly. She sees the facade here, the polite lies that you tell to soothe things over in places like this. Sees the bright smile that accepts blame when moments before he was panicked. Mark is trying to save her from something, and she knows that it must be terrible.
Big department chief now, Marquez. On you then.
After Mark sees Miss Cobell standing at the end of a long dark hallway, we come to his outie self, presumably later that night on a really awkward date. Mark fumbles to find the words and drinks a little bit too quickly. They eventually talk about Lumen and the severance procedure that Mark has opted into. I believe that she offends Mark in these moments as she probes into the wild nature and questions how he could live like that, which brings us to him a few drinks later, walking down the street.
Oh, nice. The WMC's up for that.
Who? You know, most severed workers don't see the sun their whole lives.
The Whole Mind Collective, they're great.
A drunkard outie Mark picks a fight with protesters, and it really kind of ruins the date, you know? But this moment is a great way to highlight why it's not clear to the outies why the innies are slaves to the system they created.
Are you captive right now? No, seriously, because your past self chose to walk you down here to be an infantilizing prick to people.
It really is through the eyes of a drunkard, but he is operating with some righteous fury right now. In some ways, he's saying the common sense thing. Are you, viewer, a slave to your past self because they clicked on this video and now you're forced to listen to the words that I'm saying? I feel like most of you would say no, because you're free. You can choose, right? You can click off of the video right now, right? But you don't. Or maybe you do. And if we really do live in a deterministic world, both of those actions would have been done merely with the illusion of autonomy, without acknowledging that you are predisposed to maintain viewership or click off because you either love meta discussions or hate them. Mark asking this question is massive, because in some ways it creates a shield for Lumen. They aren't slaves because you aren't slaves. They have no more ability to be oppressed than you do. And if you keep getting those paychecks each week that you resigned past you to work for, present you is safe and sound. Then you just need to convince future you that you aren't marching back into slavery come Monday morning, which seems like where Mark is right now. He is the biggest advocate for the bad guys because he wanted to die, but only for 8 hours a day.
Okay, come on.
Mark gets home, he opens up another brewski and gets interrupted by the big reveal from episode 1, Miss Cobell, though she goes by Mrs. Selvig on the outside. Now, the main drama that comes from this is that we know what happened to Petey, and we don't know if anybody else besides Mark knows that he appeared claiming to be unsevered. This is best highlighted with the red envelope that Petey gave him containing all the tea, sitting on the counter while his boss sniffs around his home.
Are we fighting?
I just keep thinking about those damn bins.
She gives him cookies overflowing with chamomile and makes a joke about it in case he wasn't a fan. But this superior of his giving him cookies that are linked to stress reduction and sleep aid after he's been very publicly dealing with alcohol abuse and has been for, some years now, could have some interesting depth. It seems like she may be trying to take care of him in some kind of way. She then pokes into his life and then shares a really interesting thing.
My late husband was a carpenter, and before he passed, he said he would start building us a house in the hereafter. And there would be a small guest apartment in the back in case I found a new man before I got there.
He even drew blueprints.
which I keep in my purse.
This really feels like a come on, and I want to say more because of some things that happen in later episodes, but let's say those then. The night seems to have gone well as Mrs. Sylvig leaves laughing, and Mark takes a moment to fix the broken bulb that she was giving him grief about. He gets stopped by a box of Gemma's crafts and seeing a two-tone candle in the box, the binary colors highlighting Severance above everything else, and he puts the box away, reminded of his pain of losing his wife, and he falls asleep watching TV on the couch. The next morning brings rain, and he stops to read the note that he got from the Whole Mind Collective last night. It describes robbing someone of their self-governance and using pearl clutch verbiage like hacking children to bits as a way to highlight the bad, and only the bad, that you could be doing for the world when you don't know. Something about this strikes a chord, and he goes back inside to grab the note from Petey and then calls out of work.
It's at Milchek, Lumen Industries.
Mr. Milchek, it's Mark Scout. I'm a severed worker, employee number 4502.
It's odd that he talked directly to Mr. Milchek and not Miss Cobell, but there could be a few reasons for that. He could have gotten into the office first, or this could just be his responsibility, or he could just live there. It's also funny that he claims an illness and stomach pain after Miss Cobell gave him cookies, though this point doesn't come up ever. Back in the office, Dylan and Irving talk about Mark being absent, fearing the worst, and kind of assuring themselves with a little bit of hope that they can't fire two people so soon. Dylan introduces the idea of dozing, which is just falling asleep at your desk. It's a really interesting dynamic there because this normally happens because you were up late the night before. I wonder if outside Irving knows his inside self is having trouble because he's up doing whatever. Like, does he actually care about his body? Like, he's going into work probably tired and just saying, you know, fuck it. Like, maybe he views that as like 8 hours of additional sleep as someone else's at the helm, right? And would they tell him? Like, any Irving was being disciplined, but it really wasn't any Irving's fault, as outside Irving is the one who did not sleep enough or did not take care of his body enough.
I can't help that I was hired older than you.
Helly then comes in and asks about Mark, and we come to the leaders of this floor discussing the unlikelihood that Mark was actually sick.
Funny timing.
This is when we see Mark pulling up to meet Petey at the worst hideout in the world, as Dylan describes to Helly that only 1 in 5 files are ever finished.
Well, why don't we always finish the files?
So they keep so long. You know, we finish on average 1 in 5 files before they expire.
And this does align with the creation of keys or certificates like I talked about before, as they also have an expiration date. 1 in 5 being successful also obscures any insider or bad actor who is trying to steal this data, as it creates a 4 out of 5 chance they are focusing on a file that will never get used for encryption or, you know, that certificate creation. Overall, not important to the story though. We just know that whatever they do, only 1 in 5 are ever seen to completion, which is kind of a terrible success rate, you know, but like, they're not being punished for it. They're not hiring more to make that work. They're not trying to do anything else. It kind of just seems like the system is designed with that in mind. Dylan does say that the number is better than it once was after Mark's freshman fluke,
which is better than it used to be before Mark's freshman fluke.
As Dylan explains, the words seem to muffle and distort. Some sound like they are going backwards, as we are really focusing on Irving, and dozing recently being introduced is getting a little bit more real. He sees this black ooze taking over, and oh boy, was this a great moment on first watch. They set it up well with the black stuff under his fingernails and the dozing comments earlier so that this wasn't just like out of the blue, and we sit and watch an unlikely reality made real until it freaks out Irving and everything vanishes.
I'm sorry.
Irving.
I take this as him dreaming, and the reason Mr. Milchek was there and lacking his bright smile was because they have some kind of sensor that detected that Irving was asleep at his desk, so he needed to go wake him up. He woke himself up from a nightmare at the exact moment where his overseer was entering the room, and they ultimately both knew the truth. Mark then finds Petey, and we return to Mr. Milchek giving Irving the business.
We'll deduct the time you spent dozing from your Audi's paycheck. What will be harder to fix, Irving, is my and Miss Cobell's trust in you.
So, assumingly, they do let the Audi know that this happened in some kind of way. I'm just imagining Mr. Milchek calling and Audi Irving hating this man and having to put on a polite voice while he gets talked to like a parent whose son keeps sleeping in class. Sorry, Mom, you're a real one.
Thank you, Mr. Milchick.
Instead of the break room, though, we get a wellness visit with Miss Casey.
Oh God, a 4.
Don't fuck around.
They continue talking about the work and what they were cleaning. Cleaning is an interesting word to use with the information that we have. Dylan gives the leading theory about killing deep sea eels to make more room for people to live. And it also gives us kind of a perspective that he has here.
Okay, if our Audis are up there severing their brains, shit must have gotten pretty bad.
Which is just so insightful, so true. It must be something bad going on. Like, no sane person would want to simply enslave themselves for 8 hours a day for a paycheck that may or may not lead to a life with more freedom. Who would want to do that, right? Mr. Krabs, right? This theory about blowing up eels because that's the most dangerous part of living underwater, or the sole thing preventing us from creating affordable housing down there, it shows a bit of ignorance that could be coming from him being uneducated as a complete person, or the severance procedure, which we know allows people to retain some information about the world, the information that they decide that they need, such as Delaware existing or Mr. Egan's breakfast. And it's curious that they allow them to remember the sea, but not their mother's eye color. And it's curious that Dylan, for some reason, thinks that the outside world has underwater drones carpet bombing anything, right?
This is the leading theory?
Irving apparently thinks they are cutting swear words out of movies, and something about that also has my attention. Like, it feels like that trope where villains drink milk for some reason.
But what is it? Like, what are we actually working on down there?
I don't know. I thought without Severance it would make more sense, but...
Mark and Petey talk about what they do at the same time that Dylan and Helly have the same discussion, and I love how this played out on screen. They could have had each scene back to back, but splitting those moments up until they are discussing the same thing that we really care about has such a cinematic feel and great pace. Petey says that he has been put back together for 2 weeks and says that he hid the original map of the severed floor that he made for Mark when he left. 2 weeks is a long time, but it does confirm that he was unsevered and working on that floor before his final days there. He has a little bit of an episode and cites the reason as reintegration sickness.
Never heard of that one.
Mark is quite skeptical to what he's hearing. The claim is that severance is impossible to reverse, and he is laid with that concept for many nights. So hearing someone say otherwise, even sincerely saying otherwise, comes with a lot of doubt. This also highlights that Petey is the first to do this thing. He is the first to make it out, and it starts forming this immature operation that could lead to real change, but is still in its infancy.
What is it that happens down there that's so bad?
He brings up the break room and has a recording of himself going through that process. He must have gotten this equipment in and out during his time unsevered, if I had to guess, but he could have ultimately had additional help, but we just don't know about it yet. He must have done something wrong on purpose, maybe, so that he could record this part of the bad thing that we know happens down there, as there really isn't too much things that we can really identify as bad, or something that is malicious, or something that the person that has consented to severance is ultimately not aware of, that is why they need to have a further discussion about if they actually want to subject themselves to that thing or not.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, sir. I didn't think anybody was out here.
This is when Irving meets Christopher Walken, or Burt, from Optics and Design. It's a nice little conversation that reveals some of what another department does on a severed floor.
So this is your work.
We don't paint them. We do hang them.
Which begs the question about what optics they care about, because normally it's the public, and what they design if not the things they hang. It feels like it's a subtle way to tell us that they are targeting the optics of severed people. Perhaps the job is all about trying to design things that create narratives that keep the workers in line, or productive, undistracted, or just not revolting. I'm imagining the early days of severed floors having a single poster of a cat on an uneasy wire with a caption, "You can do it," and that lasted up until the point where someone hanged themselves underneath after considering what they could do for 10 years of doing the same thing. Then they realized that they had to have another department that controlled the optics of this space, designing things that gave Irving something to look at or look forward to or change the monotony of the day that could drive people to insanity. A team that makes the space feel more alive and less like a coffin. Also, if we're going by the break room logic, optics and design must have some kind of hidden meaning aside from being the people that are in charge of new tote bags.
There's new ones coming next month. Best design yet, in my view.
Now, that's all I'll be thinking about until then.
Irving finally goes inside to talk to Miss Casey, and we see a pretty soothing place. I would absolutely do anything possible to keep coming back to this place. This whole moment is quite an incentive for a world of white walls.
Just relax your body and be open to the facts. Try to enjoy each equally.
She starts reading off about his Audi and how good of a person he is. It's really sweet, but also haunting that the reward is just telling a person the information that you stole from them, right? Like that you stopped their memory from knowing information that may or may not be true at all.
Your Audi is splendid and can swim gracefully. I'm sorry. Please try to enjoy each fact equally.
The session almost stops when Irving laughs because he is meant to enjoy each point equally, and talking or laughing clearly shows a favor to whatever was last said. It's another really odd thing. Like, they want him to enjoy this or get some peace, but also more than that, they want him to be stoic and will stop saying things that he wants to hear if he isn't stoic. The things that she reads off are also interesting. Audi Irving liking to swim continues this water theme that the work may or may not relate to. He even laughs at the point, which is when he loses the first 10 of 100 points.
Your Audi likes the sound of radar.
This is when we see the camera watching this private moment, and later we learn that this is Mrs. Cobell or anybody else, assuming it is being recorded for future use as well. The note about his Audi liking radar also got my attention, just such a weird thing to note. It also implies that they allow them to continue knowing what radar is as well. Like, that didn't need to be scrubbed from his mind for some kind of reason. I feel like it's hinting at something that Irving does outside, or like what his Audi self is coming from, right, with radar. We then see Dylan getting a snack, which they can only have 2 a day, and my goodness, this is so depressing.
Is it just the elevators?
Jesus, stairwells too. Why? You gotta let the info smuggling notion go.
Helly continues her crusade to understand the mechanics of the floor better, trying to imagine ways that they haven't to get a message in or out. She is not ready to drink the Kool-Aid, and before too much can be said.
Hi, kids. What's for dinner?
Nope.
How was wellness?
Irving talks about meeting Burt, and Dylan is ready to brawl.
I've met that guy. He's a fuck. You didn't tell him where we are, did you?
Bert's not a fuck.
They discuss not trusting the other departments and not wanting their location known for an unknown reason, and this is ultimately when Helly sees what she should.
That.
Yep.
She says that it was scary, and they rejoice that she was finally able to see what they wanted her to. We then see Miss Cobell staring from her window, studying Mark's quiet home while he somehow snuck Petey into the basement. We don't know if she knows or if she saw or if she cares and just said nothing, right? He offers what he has to Petey and unpacks a sleeping bag while Petey uses the restroom.
You okay in there?
Yeah, I'm good.
Petey starts coughing up blood after not answering a phone call and then loses touch with reality. For a moment, he is back in the office, and it's a great way to make us ponder about the trauma he has experienced and is experiencing as we get this incredible exit. It's honestly such a smooth ending, and it makes us wonder what this man is going through. What has he seen? Is Miss Cobell about to knock on the door and make things worse, or does he finally have a second of safety with someone he once knew as his friend? Is safety even possible for a man that can't keep his past and present aligned? And is he seeing Mark shower right now, or the prison bathroom tile that he thought he escaped forever? But with that, we come to the end of the video. The next episode breakdown is already in progress, so be sure to hit that subscribe button if you liked this one. Much love, everybody, and I cannot wait to talk to you all again soon.